Hi everyone. I'm not an ex-lecturer. I'm not used to standing up here with this very bright light, but I'll do my best with it. Okay, I'm going to mainly read mine because that's the way I've put it together. So I moved to Bristol in November 2005, aged 59, and I can remember the first few months as possibly the loneliest of my life. I felt uprooted. I thought I'd made a terrible mistake moving here. I spent a lot of time on the phone and a lot of time going back to London. I tried various social groups, which didn't really work. I had nothing in common with the women I met. And it was only when I started living in Bristol as my real self that I began to feel at home. And I'm going to explain to you what my real self is by reading something I wrote. I wrote a chapter called Retiring into the World, and I took this title from it. Okay. I was forced into early retirement in 1996, my 50th year. I worked for a local youth and community service. The week before I left, a caretaker asked me if I had any hobbies. As I gazed out of the window of the idyllic rural scene of the training centre, I refrained from murmuring, yes, overthrowing patriarchy is my main hobby, and I settled instead for something politely innocuous. I hadn't refrained enough in the time I'd worked there. Being out as a radical feminist lesbian almost from the first moment I'd arrived, fresh from an ILIA Young Women's Project, had always brought problems, compounded by my becoming a trade union negotiator when the service was restructuring. Well, I won't say any more about that. It was 20 years ago, but I will then just end with something I still feel. Although it's a matter of grave concern to me that lesbians and women generally who will not collude with hetero-patriarchal values are often victimized in their workplace, I still prefer to spend my time involved in political action where I'm fighting male power collectively with other women and campaigning to improve the lives of women and girls, rather than constantly fighting an organization where I'm completely isolated. Swapping financial security for future uncertainty has had a liberating effect on me, so that instead of modernizing my management theories, I can think again about fighting to change the world. Okay, so that's what I was saying by my real self. Political activism and fighting to change the world is what I've been doing for all the years I've been a lesbian feminist, and it's what I found my niche doing in Bristol. I joined a feminist organisation, then I became part of what was then the Women's Forum. It doesn't exist any longer. I campaigned intensively for and got the funding for Bristol Rape Crisis Centre, and then I got the job of setting it up, which I did, and it's still running, of course. But as I aged, through my 60s, I found new focus through other campaigning organisations, not lesbian feminist, but very important in terms of what was happening in the UK and in Bristol. And also, I have to say, in terms of me getting older, getting ill at times, like Margaret, I've also had a stroke, but I had it when I was 59 before I came to Bristol, so I try to keep fit, go to the gym, do all this stuff. But I joined Bristol Older People's Forum, and I was actually on the management of that for several years. And I'm now a key member of Bristol Protect Our NHS, as the privatisation and wrecking of the NHS by the present government has demanded strong campaigning groups if we're to save it. And just a word about Protect Our NHS. What we do, we lobby MPs and local councillors, we do street stalls, I'm very involved in that weekly. We stage demonstrations once we walk through the whole of Bristol in our scrubs, carrying a petition that we'd got thousands of people to sign, which was a mile long when it was put together. We made the ITV and BBC News with that. That was just before the last election, so unfortunately we had no success. But we're still fighting. We also, in Broadmead, we created, when Richard Branson tried to take over children's services, we created a tax haven with bananas and deck chairs and sand, and sort of explained to the public one Saturday what Richard Branson was doing, and we actually saw him off. Now, the people in this group are actually mainly pensioners, and I'm 70. A lot of them are in their mid and late 70s, and one of the things, they've become friends. A lot of them came to my 70th birthday last June, because I think when you are involved in groups that have the same political commitment as you do, you automatically become friends as well. So that's happened. So the point I'm making here is that continuing, I'm getting ahead. I've said what I've written already. Okay, so I haven't said a lot about being a lesbian in Bristol, except to make it clear, as I did at the beginning, that as part of the women's liberation movement, making a better world for women and girls is my priority. Now, this brings me on to an important point, and I hope, don't take this as a criticism, it sort of is, but it's not directed at the people here. It's a more general political point. An increasing number of us, of lesbians, are getting very concerned. Well, we've been very concerned for quite a while at being lumped into this grouping LGBT. We didn't actually choose it. We don't agree with it. And it should be obvious from what I've said already, it doesn't reflect our interests or our politics. Like, we have quite different politics. As a lesbian feminist involved in the women's movement, I have particular priorities. And this was confirmed with the battles against Clause 28 in the 1990s, where lesbians from the autonomous women's movement tried to work with gay men again and found they sort of didn't listen to anything we said and snaffled all the funding going. And so we went back to being the women's liberation movement and working autonomously. Under the LGBT acronym, the erasure of lesbians has actually continued, and we're generally ignored in government and local policies, in education, health, etc. And I know this, we've done a lot of analysis and research on it. The only advance which politicians are keen to point out is lesbian marriage. But unfortunately, here again, lesbian feminists have a critique of marriage, and we don't see this as an advance. We've always explored alternative ways of relating, and we continue to do so. And for a lot of us, friendship groups are as important to us, or more important, than traditional family structures. For instance, my close, intimate friends live in London, Brighton, Melbourne, Newcastle upon Tyne, Lampeter, just to name a few places. I'm currently involved in lesbian feminist groupings and writings on a national and European scale. And through these groups, a lot of us have met many young lesbian feminists who are keen to hear about their past and their heritage from us. And a very large number of younger lesbians are still involved in the violence against women's sector. I do some lesbian things in Bristol. I'm in a walking group, and we have our Pink Herrings social network, and I go to BOPs occasionally and socials there as well. But again, I read the community development report, and I think it isn't its fault, but this LGBT kind of grouping has been imposed, and it's been imposed by Bristol Council, it's imposed by Obama, it's imposed all over the world, and it's very hard to make your point that you don't agree with it. But what's happened, like that report, through no fault of its own, speaks of LGBT and HIV populations, and then says that neither group's interested in their own separate communities, but instead, I'm quoting, LGBT and HIV residents wish to be integrated into the larger care home community. Well, I don't know any older lesbians who'd be happy with this. where what have I said? By lumping us together, you're in danger of totally ignoring a very distinct group. Lesbians, especially those of us who are involved nationally and internationally in the women's liberation movement. And there are many of us now in our 60s, 70s and 80s. And there are various DVDs, some of which you can watch on TV, which show this. There's a wonderful film called Lesbiana, A Parallel Revolution, and it's a whole lot of elderly women up to age about 90 talking, and it's interspersed with photos of them when they were young at women's sort of gatherings and marches and karate and all sorts of things. And there's another film called She's Beautiful When She's Angry, which deals with this to some extent. So talking of care homes, I'd just like to finish with two examples. Some of you may have heard of May Sarton, an American lesbian author, though she didn't necessarily like being defined as a lesbian because she said it, interestingly, the opposite of what I'm saying. It put her into a slot. That she was born in 1912 and died in 1995. And as long ago as 1973, she wrote a groundbreaking novel, As We Are Now, about an older lesbian in a care home who was vilified, scorned, patronized, and treated very cruelly, and who ended up setting fire to the home and burning everyone in it, including herself, as the only escape. So that's a symbolic kind of thing, almost finished. And in real life, this is horrible. I was at a training event here in Bristol a few years ago when it was recounted that two elderly lesbians in a care home shared a room. They were discovered in bed together and subsequently forced apart by being put in separate rooms. So what I'm saying is, as older lesbians, we don't conveniently fit into a slot defined by others, and it would be really nice if Bristol Ageing Better would seriously consult with a range of us, a range of older lesbians, to find out what we actually want as we get older. And you might even find that we want an old Dykes home, and you may even want to give us some lottery funding for it. And to really end, I want to go back to what my caretaker said 20 years ago when he asked me, did I have any hobbies to compensate for my early retirement? And I'd like to point out that we were the counterculture generation who came to maturity by challenging social norms in the 60s. We were the hippie, anti-war, Vietnam, anti-racist women's liberation cohort. And now we're just young people grown old. And in the case of lesbian feminists, we still want to change the world, and we haven't lost our fighting spirit. Thank you.